Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I am Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say joined once again by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good afternoon, Richard.
Yeah, and good evening, Jeffrey.
Thank you. So, viewers, today's episode, AAIB Under Attack, episode 221. The Supreme Court in India heard a petition filed by the Safety Matters Foundation against the Indian government, the Ministry of Aviation, DGCA, and the AAIB India, that the preliminary report issued by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AAIB, on July 12, 2025, attributes the crash to fuel control switches being moved from run to cutoff, therefore or thereby suggesting pilot error. That the preliminary report withholds critical information. The full output of the digital flight data recorder, DFDR, the full transcript of the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, electronic aircraft fault reporting, the EAFR data, and other technical logs, fault messages, and advisories. That there is a conflict of interest between 3 of the 5 members of the investigation team, which are serving officers of the DGCA, the regulatory body, whose own oversight actions are themselves implicated in the petition. That citizens' fundamental rights under the Constitution are being violated, particularly Article 21, safety, Article 14, impartiality, Article 19, access to truthful information. The petition seeks public disclosure of all basic factual data, appointment of an independent investigator, direction that the ongoing AAIB investigation be free, fair, impartial, independent, and expeditious. So, quite a petition. Now, a couple of comments to kick this off. I rang 3994 with 40 likes. Communication with a grieving parent should only have 2 parts: condolences and support. Anything else is despicable. RaceLab 37 with 46 likes says if Air India, and he means Indian AAIB, do not comply with a free and open investigation, why does the rest of the world not stop Air India from flying anywhere outside of India? The world must force clarity on AAIB's cover-up. Jacqueline Jacobson, 6789, wow, this is very disturbing about what the AAIB told the 91-year-old father of the captain. And Steve Fuller, 6014, another great episode. The preliminary report was a deliberate attempt to place the blame on those that cannot defend themselves. And finally, the covert customer. Good morning, gentlemen. Agreed. I thought from the start that the report was vague and was certainly worded in such a way that only a particular conclusion, on the face of it, would be reached by the general public. To vilify either of the pilots by default without giving full context and evidence was and is truly irresponsible and utterly reprehensible. Your thoughts, Richard, on all of that?
Well, I think the court summed it up for me. They described parts of the preliminary report as unfortunate and irresponsible. The court has sought written statements from the central government, DGCA, the AAIB, with respect to this petition. And the court has emphasized that it will ensure that the investigation is conducted in a free, fair, impartial, independent, and expeditious manner. And the court expressed concern about selective leaks, lines and comments from cockpit voice recordings being publicized before the full inquiry is completed, which might distort public perception. And the court has scheduled a further hearing. The next date listed is the 11th of October. So we'll see what comes out of that session.
That'll be very interesting. Max E. Nielsen. This is very disturbing, naturally. In addition to the suit brought by the pilot's father, what recourse is available to the flying public? Why is Boeing seemingly satisfied and the FAA, thank you for your thoughtful and thorough investigation? Well, I don't think Boeing or the FAA are too happy with it all, but Richard, I'll let you answer that.
And I don't think the flying public are happy either. So the flying public, Max, have a recourse of who they choose to fly with, and they can vote with their feet. But as you point out, Geoffrey, I do not believe the FAA or the NTSB or the AAIB UK or Boeing or GE are satisfied with what's going on. We know for a fact that they threatened to leave the investigation at one point and return home. And India complained of unacceptable interference in its internal affairs. Well, it's not an internal affair when it's a global aircraft, so you can forget that one. India finally accepted an observer from the ICAO, and in my view, the ICAO should step in if they believe that an independent and impartial investigation is not happening. But I find even more disturbing was the visit to the captain's father by the AAIB. India has a family assistance unit that ensures medical help, counseling, financial support is available to the victims' families. And they have dedicated liaison officers who coordinate this help in each case. And the FAU, as it's called, were not informed of the AAIB visit to the captain's father and were not present. And the father was left to start his own legal battle against the AAIB. And I find that quite disgusting.
Oh, look, it's absolutely appalling. You're absolutely right, Richard. Just disgusting. It's, yeah. Goran Zarek, 3189. Another amazing episode full of concrete information and highly professional explanations by Richard, presented in a very understandable language for all. My biggest concern after this episode is how any of these official investigative bodies can be trusted at all, giving us such unprofessional, unethical and misleading preliminary report on AI 171. As I understand, both of them, the AAIB and the NTSB, signed the PR. Are they under the pressure or threat by some higher body to bypass the truth and to put in the report what they are told? Keep up that great work, gentlemen. Richard, perhaps you can deal with that one.
Yeah, well, no one has signed the preliminary report. And ICAO does not require preliminary reports to be signed by all investigators or accredited representatives. The preliminary report is issued solely under the authority of the investigating state's investigator in charge, and accredited representatives have input, but they neither co-sign nor approve the preliminary report. And in my view, the preliminary report contains one paragraph which is a very clear and outright lie. The report states the aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots IAS at about 08:08:42 UTC. And immediately thereafter, the engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from run to cutoff position one after the other with a time gap of zero point 0.1 seconds, not zero point 0.1, sorry, 1 seconds. And the engine N1 and N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. That's the end of the quote. And what I'd like to say to that is, number one, an aircraft does not reach its maximum speed before fuel is cut off to the engines. It only reaches its maximum speed after fuel is cut off. And the second thing I'd like to say is it takes between 1 and 2 seconds for an engine to spool down to below idle when it's at takeoff thrust. And the third thing I'd like to say is it takes between 5 and 8 seconds for an aircraft to lose all momentum when it weighs 213.4 metric tons and it is traveling at 170.9 knots indicated airspeed. We're showing again the crash map and timeline, which we initially showed yesterday. And I've added a few things to this map and timeline. The preliminary report states that the aircraft took off at 08:08:39 UTC. It does not state when the RAT was deployed, which in my view was 2 seconds later at 08:08:41. The preliminary report does say what the maximum speed was of 180 knots, IAS, and that was at 08:08:42. Then the fuel switches were moved to cutoff 2 to 3 seconds later, and Vmax was reached at least 5.5 seconds later than the preliminary report indicates, at more likely 08:08:47.5 UTC. And the maximum speed was at least 183.7 knots and probably more closer to 190 knots. The aircraft leveled off in less than 2 seconds after that, and 1.5 seconds later started to descend. And that was whilst the aircraft was still over the end of the runway and well before reaching the airport perimeter wall.
Now, Richard, Eugene O'Brien for K3K. In today's episode, Richard quotes the captain as saying thrust not achieved. As this is not stated in the AAIB report, could you please clarify how you've concluded that thrust not achieved was said? Keep up the great work.
Yeah, well, the quote, thrust not achieved, is from the Times in the UK. The preliminary report does discuss the engines, actually 33 times. It does discuss relight of the engines 3 times. It talks about thrust recovery, and it talks about losing or loss of altitude twice. So I don't know where the Times UK got their information from, but I guess, Geoffrey, we assume it came from the ATC.
Yes, you're right, Richard. It was reported by ATC. That was a communication from the captain to ATC. It was widely reported and picked up by the BBC. And the BBC usually is very, very accurate with their checking and cross-checking. So, yes, that's where it came from.
Okay.
Comfortably Nick 1. I'm still trying to figure out why the NTSB would go along with the supposed cover-up by the AAIB. The reply came from PA 1189. Because they're required to maintain confidentiality during the investigation and can submit addendum to the final report, which must be included. That's correct,
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, that is correct. So when the final report is available in draft, it is sent to all the investigators and accredited representatives. And then each of them can submit a statement. And that statement must be included at least in the appendix of the final report when it's published. So everyone will have their chance to have their say.
And of course, the exception to that, as we've reported recently, was Ethiopian investigation into the MAX crash in Ethiopia, and they refused. So the two parties to the investigation, the NTSB and the BIA, French investigating unit, posted it on their website. And that was unprecedented. So,
Yeah. Well, if Ethiopia doesn't follow the ICAO rules, then
yeah,
I think it's a matter for the ICAO Council to deal with Ethiopian authorities.
I agree. So David Ribble, 4661, if the AAIB India manipulated the preliminary report, then we can't even count on the timings of events. Your analysis of probable cause of the accident, thus possibly shaky also. However, your analysis is extraordinary and highly likely anyway. Great job, guys. Please continue with the 171 accident, including your masterful work on the MH370 tragedy. Thank you both. Richard, David does raise an interesting point nonetheless.
Yes, he does. And the fact is, David, number one, I have not assumed anything in the preliminary report is correct. It's only when I can cross-check what the preliminary report says with a second or even sometimes a third source. So I am not reliant on information only in the preliminary report. And most of that information is at best only given to the nearest second, and at worst is quite vague. We've pointed out before the word about is used 15 times, and the word approx is used 5 times in the report. And by contrast, the ADS-B data is given to the nearest millisecond, and the CCTV footage runs at 30 frames per second. So you have a frame every 33 milliseconds. And the ADS-B data, the CCTV data, and the ATC communications all align and are synchronized. The one that doesn't fit is the preliminary report. Some of the data in it does match, but some of the data in it does not match. And you have to ask, why is that the case?
Absolutely. MEC 3303, Richard and Jeffrey. One issue that can't be ignored is that the US NTSB and the British AAIB are also involved in this investigation. You must know they have copies of the data from the FDR and CVR. If the Indian AAIB were trying to cover up for Air India, they would blow the whistle. The preliminary report points to a deliberate act by the captain. If the US NTSB or the British AAIB thought differently, we would know it by now. Richard, MEC raises an interesting point which we've kind of covered, but what about the geopolitics? That's a huge issue with India as well.
Yeah. The Indians have already tried the don't mix in our internal affairs stab. The US is the state of design and manufacture of the Boeing 787. So the FAA, the NTSB, Boeing, and GE have a responsibility for the safety of the aircraft. And if they had found anything that questions the safety of the Boeing 787, then they are duty bound to raise this matter. If the Indian authorities want to cover up Air India operations and maintenance issues, or if the Indian authorities want to put the blame on the captain without foundation, then in my view, that is a matter for ICAO at the highest level. And what we don't know, Mac, is what representations the FAA, NTSB, or AAIB UK may or may not have made already to the ICAO.
Yeah, that's very true, Richard. That's good thought. Ding Dong 051 Anna, you have constantly stated that for the 787, the actions followed a dual engine failure is not to select the cutoff switches to off, but instead allow FADEC to relight the engines. Now you are saying the opposite, that the QRH procedure is to cycle the cutoff switches. You went as far as to say the pilots, out of desperation, may have decided to force a relight and not sit and hope the FADEC is doing its thing. Which is it?
Yeah, well, I apologize for the confusion, Ding Dong Anna. The answer is all of the above is right. When you have a single engine failure, and initially we thought there was only one engine failure, then you leave the fuel switches in run and let the FADEC do the relight. When you have a dual engine failure on takeoff, something that's not supposed to happen, then you are supposed to recycle the fuel switches from run to cutoff and then back to run. And we also had the situation of an electrical problem layered on top and prior to the engines shutting down. And that meant the rat deployed. And when the rat deploys, it only supports a single engine relight, not a dual engine. So then we started to discuss the issue of, did the pilots decide to wait the 10 seconds for the rat to come online and have sufficient electrical power to do a dual engine relight rather than attempt a single engine relight. So it's been a long evolving story. And actually tomorrow in the episode, we're going to take you back through the key points in this evolving story. And after 220 episodes, you can imagine we have the top 10 episodes that we would like to point out to the viewers.
So, Richard, let's finish off with these four comments. They're really good ones. Chuck Tintera, 1787. Gentlemen, I admire your aplomb. Even allowing for English as a second language, I would be put off by some of the odd query you have received and handled so well. Professional journalists should take a lesson from how you are reporting this situation and the clarity you include. Martin Trudeau, 6948. Brilliant show, brilliant analysis, Richard. The pilots were brilliant, professional, heroes doing an amazing job and almost saved the plane. Thank you, gentlemen. And from Quasar Supernova 9643, the most knowledgeable show on aviation anywhere. I think the Indian government should give you two a medal for being so invested in improving things here, but I know they will not. Firstly, a long and technical one, which we have abbreviated from Doug Swanson, 9142. I hope you don't mind, Doug. But Doug says, a good episode. Appreciate you both confronting the deception in the preliminary report. For all the comments I have read from those supporting and justifying the preliminary report, the way it is, I'll provide my take on what is so obviously wrong with the report. The most critical part of the report is the timing relationship between fuel cutoff switches being moved to cutoff and when the rat deployed. And this is exactly where the report is so vague and deceptive. If the rat deployed prior, the fuel switches being moved from run to cut off, then the captain did it narrative falls apart completely. Here's some more recent evidence. Simulations from Wings, that's Wing X, and Saban Mechanical Engineering are showing that the 180 knot maximum recorded speed in the report isn't really the maximum speed reached, assuming the simulations are somewhat accurate, which appears to have occurred approximately 5 seconds later. In my opinion, it is truly remarkable how anyone can justify the preliminary report as being credible or even adequate at any level.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Doug. And I agree with everything you say. Our apologies for doing a summary, but it was a long comment. However, viewers can read the full comment online.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's a very, very telling comments from Doug. So viewers, tomorrow, as Richard said, we're going to take you back and look at the 10 most important episodes in our coverage of the loss of Air India 171 and walk you through those. And that should be absolutely fascinating. Richard, thank you very much indeed for all your work on this really complex episode dealing with the AAIB of India. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Viewers, thank you for joining us once again. Please do subscribe to us. Please do like us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming and those fabulous questions. And please do join us to support responsible journalism. And we really do look forward to your company tomorrow, another episode of Daily Airline News. Thank you.